Hello and welcome to this week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman, and as always, to our long-term listeners, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. If you're one of our newer listeners, I'm going to encourage you to hit the subscribe button, and I'm going to encourage you to go back and listen to last week's episode, which was entitled Debt Reduction and Wealth Accumulation. We went through a step-by-step process of how you can eliminate your debt so you can then begin building wealth so you have more and more money behind you. We also spent time talking about when it makes sense to add new equipment to the office, whether it makes sense to replace older equipment with newer equipment that does the same or similar things. But on this week's show, we're taking it to the second step and talking all about building wealth. Once you've gotten the debt under control, how do you then build wealth so that you can then continue to make a big impact on your community and the world, not just professionally, but perhaps philanthropically and for generations to come? Welcome to another episode of For the Love of Chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Freeman. I've been in practice for over 30 years, and I continue to work in a $1 million practice that I built, ran, and sold. I've taught, lectured, and coached our profession and helped so many chiropractors build the practice and the life of their dreams. And now, I want to help you do the same. So here's today's show. On last week's episode of For the Love of Chiropractic, we spent time talking about how to crush debt and accumulate wealth. And in last week's episode, we took the time to go through and talk about a step-by-step plan to identify how much debt you're in and then how to eliminate that. And it's been said many times by many people over many years, anybody can eliminate all of their debt in 3 to 5 years as long as you're actively working towards doing that. And of course, what's important to note is that probably does not include the mortgage on your primary residence, your home, and that's okay. On today's episode, I want to spend time really focusing on how to accumulate wealth and what that looks like so you can live the life of your dreams, raise your children the way that you want to, and have a generational impact for years and years to come. So while I am not a certified financial planner or registered financial planner in any way, shape, or form, I'm simply a chiropractor who's worked hard over the years and learned a ton about the investing world. So nothing here is meant to be specific advice for you to follow. As always, I recommend speaking with a certified financial planner to really dial down your exact needs. But overall, the big picture looks like this. As we come out of the practice and talk about your financial world, obviously you need to have malpractice insurance. God forbid something bad happens with a patient in the office, that's covered, so it's not going to affect your personal world. I think you should have enough malpractice insurance to cover any possibility so that you sleep well at night, because that's what it's really all about. You getting a good night's sleep so that your financial world continues to grow so you're not worried about it looking over your shoulder all the time. With that taken care of, we need to think about and talk about life insurance. Now, as I mentioned on the last episode, life insurance, I believe, is there to complete a mission. If you're a married person, if you're a person with children, life insurance is to make sure, God forbid, something bad happens to you, your loved ones can still continue to live and continue to go on with the lifestyle that you've been providing for them so they can go on and live the life that you hope that they will live. And again, as I've said previously, if you're a good saver, I think term life insurance makes the most sense because you're going to use that additional money to invest it properly. And we'll talk more about that. If you're not a good saver, if money somehow finds a way to slip through your fingers, then I think a whole life policy or some of the other options that exist in the insurance world make perfect sense for you because it becomes a forced savings plan and the money never goes away. And there's some advantages to doing that also, but there's a cost for that. So you get to decide where it fits you the best. And the one other insurance I want to discuss is disability insurance. We've talked about malpractice. We've talked about life insurance. What happens if, God forbid, you become disabled? I think you need to have enough disability insurance so that you can go on living to the standard that you have been living. I once knew a doctor who was earning $250,000 a year, and he was saving about $150,000 of that net take home, which was phenomenal. Some life insurance agent had convinced him he needed disability insurance on the entire $250,000. And when we talked it through, he decided that didn't make sense because the disability insurance isn't to continue to pay for building a retirement account. God forbid something happens. You don't need all that. You're not saving for retirement because it's going to continue to pay out to you. So those changes were made appropriately to his account. So make sure you have enough disability insurance to cover you now for the way you're living. Okay, so now let's really dig into this savings thing and building wealth. The very first step is to build an emergency fund. So what's an emergency fund? Look at what it costs you to run your life on a monthly basis. And again, on the previous episode, we had talked about how to figure that out. You look at all of your costs. I think the easiest way is to put all of your expenses onto one credit card, and then you have a statement showing what it costs. But once you know what it costs you to run your life, and we'll just randomly pick a number, let's pretend it's $10,000 a month. And when I throw that number out there, I say that number does not include taxes. That's the net number, the amount of money you need in your hand to make your life work. When we get to the other side of this equation, we have to remember to add the tax side back into it. But going back to building this emergency fund, you need to have 3 to 6 months of cash available in case of an emergency. God forbid COVID breaks out like it did before. God forbid you lose your job if you're an associate. God forbid you become disabled, you break a leg and you can't practice, and your disability insurance isn't going to kick in for 3 months. How are you going to pay your electric bill? How are you going to pay your mortgage? How are you going to buy food to put on your table? That's what this emergency fund is for. Once you have this emergency fund built, or as you're building it, if something comes up like a car repair, a new transmission for the car, a set of tires, you need a refrigerator freezer for the house, you need to do washer dryer, whatever it may be, it's an emergency. This has to be handled now. There's a plumbing emergency. That's what this money is for. So you're not scrimping and looking for it, and oh my God, how am I going to do that? Or even worse, charging on a credit card that you can't afford to pay off because you haven't saved the money yet. We're getting ahead of the interest monkey, not running behind it. So now where to put this emergency fund? I think it's a fine idea to have it in a savings account in the bank. That's just fine. And while it's not paying a huge amount of interest, it's certainly paying some. Well, what about a CD at the bank? Well, that all depends on what the penalty is if you need to remove it before that CD matures. How are you going to handle that? And you can make that decision. Maybe have 1 month in a savings account, have the other 2 months in a CD that matures in 60 days. So that way, you're constantly rolling it over to get a slightly better interest rate. Another phenomenal idea is many of the investing houses, like T. Rowe Price, for example, has tax-free bond funds for your specific state. And what that means is you put the money in there, they're giving you interest for the money being in the account, and that interest that you earn is tax-free, both federally and state. Make sure that you can take it out anytime you want, and most of the tax-free bond funds do allow you to do that. Make sure there are no penalties for taking too much out too often, too soon. And again, make sure you know what it is you're looking at. But I have used an investment like that for years and years, And along the way, it has made thousands and thousands of dollars to help to increase that emergency fund. As we're talking about building wealth, I think there's a few other accounts that you should have. I think you should have a specific car account. Now, many people lease their cars, and that's just fine. If you like always having a new car, you're getting a new one every 3-ish years, and it's leased, and you're only paying for the depreciation. And a lot of doctors run that through their practice. And if your CPA says that that's okay in your state for your situation, then I think that's terrific. Personally, my CPA said it was never a good idea because you're in a gray zone with the IRS, so I never did that. But if you own your car personally, or you're making payments on it, a car account is going to make a lot of sense to you. The way a car account works is you have your current car and you're making monthly payments on it. Let's say that payment is about $400 a month. So be it. And you're paying it off and paying it off and paying it off. Eventually, you get to the point that the car is paid off. Congratulations, you no longer have to make a car payment to the bank. So what do you do with that extra $400? I want you to have a separate savings account, again, whether it's at a bank or through one of the investing houses, in like a bond fund, where every month you continue to make that $400 car payment, but now you're making it to yourself. So after the first month, you've saved $400 for your next car. After the 10th month, you've saved $4,000 for your next car. And as you do that, and the interest is getting thrown on top of it, all of a sudden, you're now building to buy your next car. And when you finally decide it's time, or the old car gives up, you can walk into the dealership and now you're not spending $30,000 or $40,000 financed. Maybe you're not doing any debt. You're just writing a check based on the car that you've chosen to buy. And if once you do that, then when you get home, and the first 30 days has gone by, you make that first car payment back into the car account. Now, instead of paying the interest, you're earning the interest. And while we're talking about different funds, I think you ought to have a vacation fund. Figure out what kind of vacations you like for you, your significant other, your family, and you know about what they cost. Maybe it's a week at the beach in the summertime. Maybe it's up in the mountains in the wintertime. Maybe it's somewhere south like the Caribbean here in the United States or Hawaii, whatever it is. And you have some idea what that costs. Maybe it's $1,000. Maybe it's $20,000. But whatever it is, on a regular basis from each paycheck, throw a certain amount into that vacation fund. And lo and behold, you'll know when you can afford to take the vacation and it doesn't cost you anything. You're not putting on the credit card and paying it off later. Or maybe even you keep throwing money into that vacation fund and you take less expensive vacations as the value keeps building up. You know what? We really thought that our vacations cost $5,000, but we only spent $1,000 on a hiking trip. We only spent $1,500 on a camping trip. Terrific. The money keeps building and keeps building. It's there for the future. So maybe take that big anniversary trip at some point in the not too distant future. And again, as we talk about building wealth, I want to double back onto something that we just barely touched on before, which is paying your mortgage. Getting out of debt does not necessarily include paying your mortgage off, the mortgage on your primary home. Most people make a mortgage payment once a month. And that's just fine. But what would happen if you made a mortgage payment twice a month? You actually would start to dig into some of the interest that you're paying, and you would get the house paid off significantly faster. Anybody you know who works in real estate or the mortgage industry could give you an amortization schedule to show you how much that would save. But one of the easiest tricks that I like is look at your monthly mortgage payment. Let's say it's $1,000 and you get paid every 2 weeks. So you're taking $500 out of every paycheck to put towards that mortgage. Well, that's terrific, and it pays it. But that's not a once-a-month payment. Because if you get paid every 2 weeks, that's 26 payments a year, and it means 2 of the months you're getting an extra paycheck. You end up making an entire extra mortgage payment every year, which I've been told cuts a couple of years off of paying off your mortgage. It just makes sense to do this. And with all of these wonderful things going on, and you're providing phenomenal care to as many people as your heart and your technique will allow you to do, or your head, your heart, and your hands, as we've talked about previously, now we can really dig into building your wealth account. This is the money that's going to carry you and your family into your retirement, if you ever choose to retire, or possibly for generations after you've hung up your hands, so to speak. So when it comes to building your wealth account, we have to talk about qualified retirement money versus non-qualified retirement money. And the number one thing that anybody in the retirement world will tell you is make sure that you max out your qualified retirement accounts. So whether that's a simple IRA or a regular investment IRA or even a Roth IRA, Roth is where you pay the taxes now, so the money grows tax-free in perpetuity. I'm a big fan of that. You want to make sure that you max out the qualified retirement account. But at some point, you will have done that also. And if you are providing phenomenal care to as many people as your heart desires, there's going to be even more money coming in beyond what your lifestyle is that can go into an additional investment account, and then that's non-qualified money. And it makes a lot of sense to put money into a non-qualified retirement account. And we'll talk about what that means exactly. But the reason for that is because the non-qualified account, you're allowed to draw on before the age of 59 and a half. That's the age that the IRS says that's when you're allowed to start touching the qualified retirement money without additional penalties. And those penalties can go all the way up to 50% of the money that you take out. So by having non-qualified retirement funds, you're allowed to touch it any time that you want, but the rule with building wealth is you never touch that money either. And with current tax law, which changes all the time, but with current tax law, the other big advantage of that non-qualified retirement money, or even the Roth IRA money, because again, in both those cases, you have paid the tax on the money as you earned it, and then you invest that money and it grows. And when you take it out, you're not taxed as ordinary income on it. There is some tax of capital gains, and that applies differently to different assets and investments. But capital gains tax is typically significantly lower than your ordinary income tax bracket. And if you've stayed with me to this point, now we have probably the most difficult thing to cover. The difficult thing is, well, where am I going to put that money? There's lots of different options. I mean, I could buy options, which is one investing class, and I don't recommend that for the small investor or the routine investor. You could buy individual stocks, mutual funds, bonds, bond funds. The list goes on and on and on. I could buy something called an exchange-traded fund, or I could go with a money manager. Stop. Lots of options, but let's make it really, really simple. There is a famous investing voice. This man's name is Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is credited with creating more millionaires, at least in the United States, than anybody else in history. Warren Buffett believes in a style of investing called buy and hold. Simply stated, the Warren Buffett style of investing is you find a company that makes America run and you buy their stock. And as long as their company is around And as long as America wakes up tomorrow and wants to run the way America runs, that company will make money. Well, like what are those companies? Well, if you were going to buy the individual stocks, it would be things like, let's see, every morning people wake up and want to shave with a Gillette razor, for example. So as long as people wake up and want to shave, Gillette will make money every single year. And as long as people want to Coke with their lunch, Coke is going to make money every single year. So McDonald's, maybe Dunkin' Donuts, maybe it's Starbucks. Look at what makes America run. What does America do on a daily basis? Those companies are going to do their absolute best to make sure they make money every single year. And if they make money, as long as you own the stock, you will too. But there are so many companies, and initially, we don't have a lot of money to invest. I think a phenomenal way to own the market, to be diversified across the market and own lots of different stocks, is to buy one of the funds that mirrors what the largest companies in the United States are doing. So I'm a huge fan of one of the indexes that's called the S&P 500. The S&P 500 are the 500 largest companies in the United States, and that pretty well is what the U.S. market is. There are companies like Vanguard, for example, that has an S&P mirror fund. It mirrors exactly what the S&P 500 does with a very low expense ratio. So by buying that one mutual fund from a company like Vanguard, and other investing houses probably have it also, Schwab probably has it, Fidelity probably has one, as well as the other ones. But by using that, you keep the expenses very, very low, and you're simply mirroring the return of the market. One of the worst things that you can do is try and time the market, jump in when the price is down, jump out when the price is high, wait for it to fall and jump back in, because what happens is it's impossible to really time the market. You're not going to be able to jump in at the lowest possible point. And you're certainly not going to be able to jump out at the highest possible point. Ride the wave, because your time horizon is not in days, weeks, months, or even years. It's probably in decades. And while the stock market goes up and down on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, year in, year out, or decade in and decade out, while there are ups and downs, overall, that trend has always been up. At least it has been for the 100 plus years that we've been watching the market closely. And by the way, that's true even when you factor in the Great Depression, the recessions, the housing turnaround, the dot-com bust. All of these things have been what's called market corrections. And if you just held tight, you didn't lose money. You ended up making far more than was ever lost or than you had put in. And all of that is above what inflation is also. So your money is making money. You're not losing buying power, as we had talked about on that previous episode also. And the final point that I want to discuss on this episode of Building Wealth is whether or not to use a money manager or not. The way money managers work is one of two ways. Either you pay them a flat fee to help you put a plan together, and they put it in writing, they send it to you via computer, all those sorts of things, and you pay them and you say thank you for your time and your expertise, and you walk away. Or you can contract with a money manager who will charge you a certain percentage based on the amount of money that they are managing for you. Now, active money management, that's where they're buying and selling and trading and watching stocks go up and down. Typically, those fees are higher than passive money managers. I'm a huge fan of the passive money manager because historically, they do better than the active money managers as a group. It's been said when talking about active money managers, anybody can hit a bullseye one time. But are they going to hit a bullseye year after year after year, time after time after time? No, they're not. And eventually it all averages out. So why not buy that average, which is a fund that mirrors the market, and you can pay a certain fee if you want to have the person manage how much is in which different funds, because they're international funds also. It's not just all about the U.S. investing market. Typically, in my experience, these money managers charge about 1% on the first $1 million that they are managing. And as there's more money under management, that fee goes down. I have seen that fee and know managers who charge as little as 0.5% to manage money for their clients. But again, it all depends on how much money they're managing and the relationship that you have with them. And the biggest reason that building your wealth account is so important is because by doing this and automating it, just like you have somebody who answers your phone for you at the office, just like you have a mechanic who fixes your car for you, by automating this process of your wealth account, it frees your mind, your head, your heart, and your hands to dedicate yourself to helping as many people as possible, being the doctor, and taking care of your patients. So then you and your family are taken care of also. All right, and that's our show for today. If you have a question about today's show or your own practice, feel free to reach out at theloveofchiropractic.com. Before making changes to your practice, be sure to seek legal advice regarding those changes and regulations in your state. For the Love of Chiropractic is an RGF production, all rights reserved. And thanks for listening. Original music provided by Hunter Rich Music.